China is trying to kill the US dollar. First, we need to understand what that even means. And in order to understand that, we need to understand the concept of a reserve currency. Now, the point of this video is to explain why China wants to kill the US dollar. So if you already know what a reserve currency is, feel free to skip to the timestamp below. For everyone else, a reserve currency is, in its simplest form, a currency that other countries hold in a bank account, basically. Now, why do other countries do this? Well, the US did, in a sense, force everyone's hand a little after World War II, but that is topic for another video. In a classic sense, countries hold reserve currencies to be able to trade with other countries, mostly because reserve currencies are stable. Let me give you an example. Country A wants to trade with country B, but these countries are very small, and because of that, their native currencies are not very stable. As in, country A's currency rises and falls in value against country B's currency, and country B's currency does the same against country A's currency. So if these two countries want to trade goods and services, they need a stable currency, so that the price that they agreed on ends up being the price paid. The US economy is massive, and the US dollar is very stable because of that. A dollar is worth a dollar, and unless some black swan event happens, a dollar will always be worth a dollar. Now, there are other reserve currencies like the euro and the yen, because these are also very stable. But the US dollar is what's known as a world reserve currency. That means it is by volume the most held currency by foreign nations out of every currency on the planet. Now, this gives the US immense power, which is where we start to answer the question of why China wants to kill the US dollar. Now, this immense power was recently just highlighted during the start of the Ukraine war. You see, Russia holds a lot of dollars in reserve, so the US could, at any moment, and did freeze that money. And it can do this with any country. So the more US dollars that a country holds, the more hold, pun intended, the US has over that country. Step out of line, risk losing your money. It also gives the US trillions of dollars to invest in itself. Why? Because most countries store their US dollars in US Treasury bonds. So as long as the US can invest that money in things that will generate a higher return than what it owes on those bonds, it makes money on other countries' money. So a few days ago, China and Brazil came to an agreement to trade between themselves in their own native currencies. Now, they do trade a lot between each other, over $150 billion worth. Now, that is a lot of money, but by itself, it is a drop in the bucket, barely scratching the surface of the total world trade. So then, why is it worthy of our attention? In my opinion, it's worthy of our attention not so much because of this trade deal, but because of what it signifies, especially when it comes to China. You first have to understand the relationship between China and the US. The United States is the world superpower. It is also the strongest military in existence and the largest economy on the face of the earth. It is also democratic. This has to be mentioned. China, on the other hand, is the second largest economy in the world. China is also the second strongest military in the world. And China is very much not democratic. But China wants to be the world superpower. And because of that, even if we don't see it on a day-to-day basis, these two countries are, in essence, at war. And it is not a war of bullets, but a war of strategy. The US is the defending champion, and China is the up-and-comer who wants the world superpower belt. China is the antithesis to the United States, and the United States is the antithesis to China. So if the US has this world reserve currency status, this super weapon, which it is allowed and encouraged to use every single day, which is unlike every other super weapon, which are heavily discouraged, then naturally it is in the best interest of China to try and eliminate it. Now, this attack on the US dollar comes in two fronts, and I foresee China continuing to attack from these two fronts. The first is to try and lower the amount of US dollars that it personally holds. The point of this is to reduce the power the US has over it, because it only requires itself. This means in a worst case scenario like war, the US has less economic power over China. The problem for China is that as long as the US dollar is the world reserve currency, China will have to hold some US dollars in order to trade with the hundreds of countries that also hold US dollars in their reserves. And that is where the second attack and the second front comes in. And it's already started doing it. China will try to get other countries off of the US dollar drug. Now, this is more concerning, and it is what it did in a very small way with Brazil. And if it can do the same thing with enough countries, the US dollar breaks. The US dollar breaks. The US dollar breaks. Here's the good news. The second attack is much more difficult. It will take decades if it even happens in the first place. Now that's for a couple of reasons. The first is that the US is not really just a country. It is an ideology. Now it may feel like lately we have lost sight of that ideology, but it is still very ingrained in the Western world, and that is one of freedom and democracy. So there will be stiff resistance from other Western countries to get off the US dollar. And usually Western countries are much more developed and have a much higher GDP. Most of them, China sells to. So for as long as that resistance holds, and as long as there is not a major reason to switch off the US dollar, it will remain the world reserve currency indefinitely. On the same token, it only takes a string of black swan events to change all of that. War, default of debt, superinflation weakening the dollar, political turmoil making the US less stable. Things we're actually living through, to be honest. Any of those, if they get bad enough, could start that chain reaction. And in the meantime, while the US fights and argues within itself, countries that align with China continue to plot, plan, and execute. Russia and India left the US dollar almost a decade ago. Now with China and Brazil, soon to be South Africa as well, you have what is known as BRICS. These are the 5 leading emerging economies. Basically the entire team of up-and-comers. And they all plan to start trading with each other in their own currency, which will be known as BRICS. So is the world order changing? Is the US losing its status as the world superpower? And is the US dollar on the decline, soon to be replaced as the world reserve currency? Well, no. The US dollar is actually value-wise stronger than it has been in the last 20 years. But the total dollars held in reserve has been on a steady decline. So while there is no immediate threat today or tomorrow or next year, there are signs, there are plans in place, and there are omens that a new world order is in the works. This plan is being spearheaded by China. And if China is good at anything, it is lying in wait and planning. So will it work? Will there be a new world order in 40, 50, or 60 years? I don't f***ing know, but I hope to be long gone if it does. As always, my name is Derek and I got my degree in finance. You don't have to. I hope this video was informative and enlightening. I've been an entrepreneur for over a decade and I love sharing this stuff with you. And it's what we do here every single week. So if you like no BS videos about personal finance, entrepreneurship, money, and online business, then I think you'd love the channel and I would be both honored and humbled if you subscribed and followed along on the journey of financial education and financial freedom. Till the next one.